Hello again, I'm Mark McIntire, your host for Freedom Matters, where we drill down on the basic principles and values of human freedom. And today we have a spectacular guest, an individual who's making headlines even as we speak. There was a Newsweek article with the headline, DePaul students demand professor apologize for immoral conduct after a pro-Israel op-ed. Newsweek headline. Our guest today is Professor Jason D. Hill. He's a professor of philosophy at DePaul University in Chicago. And he is also a author of a very important book, which of course is available on Amazon. And you probably saw it in the opening credits, We Have Overcome. But we did interview him for our radio version of this show last year. But I want to welcome to the TV version of Freedom Matters, Dr. Hill. Thank you very much for doing the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I know you're a busy guy these days. I mean, students are protesting you. Everybody's writing letters on your behalf. And I just want to go over a couple of things for our audience about your background. You are a native Jamaican. You are a native of Jamaica, the island of Jamaica. You came to this country legally. You bootstrapped yourself to become a professor of philosophy, which is what you always dreamed about doing, as a man who fulfilled his dream. You've also written 3 other books, which they are Becoming a Cosmopolitan, What It Means to Be a Human Being in New Millennium, and Civil Disobedience in the Politics of Identity. When Should We Not Get Along? You're also president and CEO of the Institute for Immigrant Assimilation. So you're a busy guy. You're a very busy guy.
I am.
First of all, for those who didn't listen to the radio program we did with you last year, let's just go back a little bit and get some of your biography, because I think it's a fascinating history of the American dream. What brought you to the United States of America, Professor Hill?
Well, I knew I wanted to be a writer from around the age of 9. And when I turned 17, I knew I wanted to be a philosopher. And I had always been fascinated by America. I thought from a very early age on that America was the most unprecedented phenomenon in the world. And I had a chance to go to England, and I had a chance to go to Canada, and I had relatives in Europe. And I told my mother that no, I was coming to America, and I wanted to make America was my destiny. And so I had worked as a journalist after high school in Jamaica as a political journalist, and made my way to America at 20. And my family came along with me for moral support, and my brother came along as well. He joined the military shortly after. Mm-hmm. And I worked for a couple of years before I started college quite late. I didn't start college until I was 22 because I had to work up to 3 jobs to put myself through school.
Now that's important. Let me stop you right there, Jason. That's very important. You had 3 jobs. Did you have any government support? Did you take out a big loan?
Most certainly not. I didn't think, on principle, I didn't think America owed me anything because I was a newly minted immigrant.
What a strange idea. America doesn't owe immigrants anything? What a crazy idea that is. That's amazing.
Exactly. No. I was, I'm totally against this cult of entitlement, and I didn't think America owed me anything, except one thing, to keep out of my way. Out of my way.
To let you be free.
My governing mantra was place no obstructions in my path to block the efforts that I pursue in behalf of my life. Mm-hmm. And so I had a very, very difficult struggle putting myself through undergraduate to pursue. I was pursuing 2 degrees, a baccalaureate, a degree in philosophy and a degree in literature.
Wow.
And so I worked very, very hard, up to 3, sometimes 4 jobs, 47 hours a week, going to school full time, and graduated magna cum laude at the top of my class, and then won a scholarship to do my Ph.D. In philosophy at Purdue University.
Wow.
But I'd always been fascinated by America. I thought America was this great republic. I'd been reading American history from the time I was 13.
Yeah.
And I'd been reading world civilization from when I was 14, really, and looking at empires and civilizations, and thought very early on that I wanted to be a part of this great republic, that my destiny was going to be forged in the crucibles of American history. And made a conscious decision that I was coming to America. And there was no doubt in my mind that America was going to be part of my destiny. So I came here and worked hard and made the decision to become a philosopher and a writer. And there you go. And,
the subtitle of your book, We Have Overcome, and I want to drill down a little bit as to why that title is that title, but the subtitle here is An Immigrant's Letter to the American People. You told me before that as your plane landed, as you were arriving by plane to the United States, you had a mental note that you made to yourself that you were going to make a contract with the people of America. Tell us about that. What happened there? Why is this an immigrant's letter to the American people? Why do you title it that way?
Well, I wanted to make a covenant that the best within myself, the most noblest within myself, would always be called upon when I enacted my story in America. That is, I would always call upon not the lowest common denominator, not any semblance of mediocrity within myself, but the best within myself always. That America itself is a country on which aspirational identities are built. America is a country on which aspirational identities are built. And I had a noble vocational calling that was not only to be a philosopher, but to be a moral human being. And I saw America in terms of moral. America is a moral country. It was forged in moral, not just political terms, but it was forged in moral terms. And I wanted to forge a contract with the American people and with this country, that in the name of the best within myself and in the name of the best within this country, that I would always call upon the best within myself to enact upon this landscape of America the name of Jason Hill, and that inscribed on this great country would be the best within myself that I would scroll across this country.
Well, you certainly have stepped up to that covenant that you have made. Let me tell you something. The reason why, let's drill down on the reason why you titled your book, We Have Overcome. I'll just give the audience a little bit of a hint here. Dr. Hill has previously talked to me about the fact that Americans are obsessed with racism. And in your culture, in the Jamaican culture, it's not true. They're not obsessed with racism. Could you fill us in on that, please?
Well, we don't have a racial taxonomy in Jamaica. I mean, we're a country of many one people. I myself I'm of mixed ancestry. You know, I have my grandmother is part Sephardic Jew. Her grandfather was a Sephardic Jew. Her mother was East Indian. And on my father's side, and there is English ancestry, and on my mother's side, there's also Black and Hispanic ancestry. So I'm something of a mutt, and Jamaicans go by pigmentocracy. We go by what we see you as. If you're a brown person, you're a brown person. If you're a red person, you're a red person. Americans are obsessed with race, and I titled the book "We Have Overcome" because it seems to me that since the third founding of America, which was the momentous passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, I think we can take Lincoln's Gettysburg Address as a second founding of this great republic, that legal oppression against Black has occurred. That is, legal oppression, the full recognition of legal standing of Blacks has occurred.
Yeah.
So there are no laws that are passed against Blacks simply on the basis of race in this country. So in some sense, we have overcome. It's not that we shall overcome. This 1964 passage Civil Rights Act was not just an act that granted Blacks full recognition before the law. It was a massive form of social engineering in which it forced whites not to discriminate against Blacks. It said to white people, you can't just use your living room or your business as an extension of your living room. You cannot discriminate against Blacks. It was a massive resocialization, social engineering program. So I think we have overcome. We have overcome the discriminatory practices of the state against blacks, which is what the civil rights movement was about. It was about the state discriminating against black, the private racist attitudes of individuals. I mean, that's certainly something that we as moral citizens should be fighting against. But in terms of the state leveraging discriminatory practices against individuals, that was achieved with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So I think titling the book, We Have Overcome. But also I wanted to tell the story in my book, We Have Overcome, of immigrants such as myself, who have taken advantage of this country and the momentous progress that the stupendous progress that we have made in terms of race relations. And have taken advantage of the progress and have made something amazing of their lives. So in this book, I tell the story of these immigrants. And the other thing that I wanted to show was that in an age of Americophobia, in which this country, this great republic of ours, is so demonized as an imperialistic, intrinsically bigoted, racist country, I wanted to show the American people in this book what really makes this country an exceptionist nation, and what makes the American people an exceptional people. I don't think that story has really been told. We have been described as an exceptionist nation, but I don't think in a very short book anyone has ever told the American people what the moral meaning of this country is, which I do in the second chapter, and what makes this country an unprecedented phenomenon. And so I wanted to write a sort of love letter, which is a book of gratitude to the American people and to this country for having brought me where I am, because I have seen the other side. I've lived in the country. In some sense, I wanted to sort of show what it was to come to a country with $120 in your pocket.
So you must be shocked and amazed to finally have the realization that higher education now has been taken over by cultural Marxists who want to shut you up because you happen to express points of view that are foreign to them and are opposed to them. Does that distress you? Does that bother you that you now have people protesting you for writing an op-ed piece in the Federalist news outlet? How does it strike you? Is this a betrayal of what you expected America to be?
Well, it certainly is a betrayal of our educators. I think these people are reactionaries posing as progressives. And I think the assault against free speech, and I think our educational system, especially in the humanities and the social sciences, which are becoming nothing more than indoctrination centers, where far leftist professors are indoctrinating students and not educating them to be critical thinkers, not presenting both sides or a multiplicity of sides, or really not presenting scholarship, but highly politicizing the classroom into far left ideas, is a betrayal of what it means to actually receive an education, which is to become, in my view, a self-governing, autonomous person, and not just some sort of mindless automaton who is, the surrogate or the deputized stand-in of your professor.
Now, you first came to public national notoriety for your previous article, wherein you proposed that we defund public education, and I'd like to drill down on that because you actually converted me to that particular point of view. So it's a large thought, and you're a much better philosopher than I am because you can have larger thoughts than I have. I never thought of the idea of taking away the funding, especially the tax support, the tax base for public education, because it has become a cultural Marxist indoctrination process. I had never thought of it until I had you on my radio show. And then you introduced me to the idea of defund, hashtag defund public education. How did you arrive at that particular point?
Well, I really looked at the hypocrisy of these radical, I call them Bolshevik welfare scholars, whose paychecks are funded by a capitalist system, a free market system that is funding the educational system. So when we look at the businessmen and the businesswomen and the corporate donors who are funding our educational system, and then we have in the humanities and the social sciences an anti-free market, anti-capitalist, and profoundly anti-American rhetoric that is permeating and pervading the school, the higher educational systems, and that's trickling down to the K through 12 system.
Yeah.
I thought it's just actually immoral for businessmen and businesswomen and for corporate institutions to be funding their own destroyers. There's a saying that anyone can harm me, but I'm not going to be complicit in those. I'm not going to help my destroyers.
How did this happen? I mean, do you blame the parents for taking their eye off the ball as to what was happening K through 12? Do you blame the politicians for electing people who have redirected the whole public education system towards a cultural Marxist point of view? Who's to blame for this shift from a free and open society in our educational system, where we teach civics, we teach the Constitution, we teach Western civilization, philosophy, theology, politics, all of this? What happened? How did they get to this point?
I think there are a couple of things that's going on here. I think that it is a kind of naivete and a kind of naivete and a kind of anti-intellectualism that pervades, unfortunately, American culture. That is, in good faith, the American citizenry has handed over the education of its children to a bunch of individuals who actually hate and despise America and have ceased to do the thinking for themselves and have ceased to pay attention to the way in which their young people are being actually indoctrinated into the cult of anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-individualism, anti-self-reliance, and being indoctrinated into a cult of victimology, a cult of grievance, a cult of entitlement. And so there's a way in which inattention or lack of attention to intellectual issues is to blame. There's also the cult of postmodernism and deconstructionism and post-structuralism, the French import, that has completely, and the cult of relativism also, that from the late 60s that have all played a very destructive role in our educational models. Relativism has been on the ascendancy since political activism has undermined real scholarship. I think what happened in the 1960s when we saw the emergence of various schools, and I'm not necessarily against the intention of some of these schools like women's studies or black scholarship or black diasporic studies or queer theory or post-colonial studies, but a lot of these disciplines or so-called disciplines have arisen, and they have as their agenda not authentic scholarship, but advocacy and political activism, where they declare a wholesale war against Western civilization and the assault against reason. I can't emphasize the assault against reason as some sort of hegemonic, imperialistic construct created by dead white men to keep marginalized people and non-Western people outside the sphere of civilization.
How did reason get replaced by feelings? Because that seems to be what's been going on. Is that reasoning? I can calculate it by 1972. I was teaching in 1972 when the core curriculum was completely wrecked, was completely eviscerated. You did not have to take a class in philosophy to get a liberal arts degree. You didn't even have to take a course in logic or critical thinking or anything of that nature. And courses in psychology expanded. And the social studies that are now called sciences, they were simply called social studies because they're not sciences.
Yes.
That's the simple problem is I watched as sociology anointed itself as a science. Economics anointed itself as a science. Political studies became self-anointed as a political science. These people are not scientists. These people that have PhDs in society, in social studies. So it was a self-actualization. It was self-affirmation that they just announced all of a sudden. We woke up one day and they're all scientists. Which is really funny. I mean, I can't believe that they got away with this.
Well, I think the universities allowed themselves to be hijacked by activists and by this notion of advocacy, and as opposed to domains of learning and scholarship, and this is where the problem started. I think where activism and advocacy replaced real scholarship, and the notion of objectivity and the notion of dispassionate learning got replaced by a kind of feel-good self-esteem. The universities were seen as domains that should confer entitlements and should confer a status of let's just say confer a status of agency on people who had historically been seen as denied agency and subjectivity, rather than remain as objective institutions of higher learning.
Yeah, I noticed that, Dr. Hill, I noticed that in 1970, the Kent State killings, during the Vietnam War, I think a lot of this has to go back to the Vietnam War. Because the generation that demonstrated successfully against the continuation of the war, I was part of that generation, and I partook in those demonstrations, and we did so mainly because of the killings at Kent State. This was the beginning of a whole generation of people questioning authority, questioning objective truth, and installing freedom. Installing feelings as a replacement for the rational understanding of freedom.
Yes, yes.
And then it continued from there. It simply went on from that particular point. So they eviscerated the core curriculum. So you didn't have to take classes even in your own discipline. Today you can get a PhD in history without ever studying European history, without ever studying American history. You can get a PhD. We have a PhD as the chair of a local college up here, she's the chair of a history department, and her PhD thesis is on the culture of rape.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The culture of rape. So definitely we're in a very strange point where feelings have replaced reasoning. Now, we've got about another half an hour of the show here. I want to get into what has made you into an immoral person all of a sudden. I mean, you teach ethics and political American policy. Is that correct at DePaul?
Ethics and political theory. Yes.
Political theory. Okay, but all of a sudden, because you wrote an article, an op-ed piece for Federalist. You wrote an op-ed piece, and now you are being badgered by the feeling mafia, and they want your head. They want you to be censured from your university. They actually want you to be thrown out, and they want to send you to a gulag. They want to send you to an indoctrination camp where your immoral thoughts can be erased, Orwellian, in an Orwellian way, and you can be brought around to think the way they think. How did all this happen? Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, you want me to tell the story?
Yeah. Tell the story. It's a fascinating story.
Well, I wrote first. about it was called the moral case for the annexation of the West Bank in Israel. And I wanted to give a very calm but quick and concise rationale for why I think that Israel had a right to annex the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Jordan took Judea and Samaria, and in April of 1950 illegally annexed that area, which was called the West Bank, which was condemned by the Arab League. But more importantly, in 1967, of course, as we know, a defensive war was fought by Israel against Jordan.
Right.
And Israel took that land.
Right.
And I argued that the people in that area quite properly, there are 2 points I wanted to make. The people in that area quite properly belong to the Jordanian government. Mm-hmm. And Israel fought an altruistic war by making those people their responsibility. Mm-hmm. That's the first point I wanted to make. Mm-hmm. The second point I wanted to make was that, generally speaking, the Palestinians in Israel vote terrorist organizations into power. They vote Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and Fatah and the PLO, the PA, Palestinian Authority, both terrorist organizations, into power. Therefore, it's quite reasonable that Israelis could see them as national security threats. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I thought that the West Bank quite properly is part of Israel, and a moral case can be made for its annexation and for the application of Israeli law over the West Bank. Well, it is a lot of vitriol from people who, the students at DePaul, who called me a xenophobic, racist, Islamophobe. Mm-hmm. And there were 7 student organizations that called for me to be censured, for me to issue an apology, and for me
to go to sensitivity training,
a racial sensitivity workshop.
Right.
And I have protested and conducted protests on campus,
right,
and launched an attack against my character, calling me moral. I refused to apologize because I stood up for my First Amendment rights and my right for free speech. So this is how this all started. I'm no stranger to controversy because I do think that when one is a thinker and a philosopher, that and one takes oneself to be a thinker, that part of being offensive is to challenge received wisdom. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, Galileo was the biggest offender. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at what he did, right? I'm not comparing myself to Galileo. I'm just saying that anyone who takes him or herself to be a thinker is going to challenge received wisdom without assuming infallibility for oneself. So this is how this whole thing started, and it just got way over the top. Mm-hmm. With the students signing a petition, which I think reached almost 2,000, some of them calling for my removal from the university.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're a tenured faculty member, so there's no chance of the university actually removing you on these grounds. There's absolutely, I think that there was a letter from the president of the university, which I happen to have here in my dandy little iPhone, and the president, who is Dr. Gabriel Esteban, and Dr. A. Gabriel Esteban, and some of the things that the president says. The president makes it a very fine, very emphatic statement to say that the university will not censure Professor Hill for making unpopular statements. Our professors and our students have academic freedom guaranteed to them by their membership in the university community. And I would also like to add to what the president said, also by the Constitution of the United States, you have that freedom, not just
That's
academic
right.
freedom. Academic freedom rests upon the First Amendment. It's not something added on to it. They also share the freedom of speech guaranteed to them by the Bill of Rights. Oh, she puts it in there, he puts it in there. DePaul University will ensure that all faculty and students are empowered to exercise their rights, and DePaul University will provide the appropriate environment where ideas can be exchanged freely in an atmosphere of safety to all. So Obviously, the university is not going to be coming after you, but that's not going to stop the cultural Marxists from trying to re-educate you. They want to send you to a re-education camp where
Yes.
where your mind can be worked on, where you can be called insensitive, and you can be called well, all kinds of filthy names. And hopefully when you're through being waterboarded at this indoctrination camp, then you'll come out on the other side of truth, as you put it, revealed truth.
Right. It's really interesting that these reactionaries posing as progressives can call Israel a genocidal apartheid state and level all sorts of heinous criticisms against Israel.
Right.
And they have the freedom to do so. But you speak a truth, which is the fact that a lot of Palestinians vote terrorist organizations into power, and you get called an Islamophobe when you're just stating something that's empirically the case.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise that these students think the way they think. It's no surprise that they think that you're an imperialist for advocating Israel's point of view as a nation, because history is not being taught anymore.
Right.
Social activism is being taught. How do you
That's
feel? Right. How do you feel? The new president of, the University, Tulsa. Yes, the University of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was just reading that new president. In his vision statement, he says, "We are no longer concerned about what students think. We want them to concentrate on how they feel." This is from the president of the university.
Mm-hmm.
Amherst
Yes.
College, in New England, they just published a 40-page booklet called The Common Language, where all of the terms that are revealed truths are to be used, and we are not going to use terms that are not in this booklet. I mean, it's just right out of George Orwell. I mean, you can't even imagine. I mean, a college handing out a booklet to faculty and students saying, these are the words you can use in your conversations about your identity?
Yes.
Fortunately, that has been retracted. And equal numbers of liberal faculty and students, along with more conservative and reasonable people, have actually called out against in fact, the president of Amherst College, there's another letter here, the president of Amherst College, Betty Martin, she actually has disowned the whole project. She says, this does not reflect us. This is not an academic freedom booklet. I don't know who came up with this, but whoever did, it wasn't me. You got the wrong one. So there is a pushback. What I wanted to get to, Jason, is you're leading a pushback, and I have a great respect for you because I've been in your position. You're leading a pushback against the takeover by the cultural Marxists of our whole education system. But I don't know, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, how long is it going to take for us to restore rational balance to public education? What's it going to take?
Well, I think it's going to take strong moral leadership, and I think we're suffering from an abysmal lack of intellectual and moral leadership. And I take myself to be a moral and intellectual leader. Mm-hmm. I took that position even before I had a Ph.D. Mm-hmm. I took that position when I was a young 19-year-old journalist, and I was always a little rebel, always standing up for positions I believed in. And I don't think, someone asked me today, a reporter asked me today, what do I think it's going to take to diffuse a situation? I said, that's the wrong terminology. Yeah. We can't be talking about diffusing a situation. We're in the midst of a culture war. And we have to talk about how to win that battle. And the way we win that battle is by assuming a position of leadership and standing up for our constitutional rights, forcing the university not to capitulate to the gross demands of moral bullies, these reactionaries posing as progressives who actually assume their infallibility, because that's what they do when they want to shut down free speech. They're assuming in the words of John Stuart Mill, their own moral and cognitive infallibility, and then they want to shut down free speech. We have to be intransigent. We have to be implacable, not in our beliefs, but implacable and intransigent in our right to assert our freedom to express our views, so long as we're not inciting violence. And so long as more professors such as myself and students stand up and refuse to back down and to fight the good fight and say, I am an American citizen and I have a constitutional right, it's in the Bill of Rights, to express my views, and no one has the right to shut me down. This is the United States of America. I will not be silenced. And I certainly would not be silenced by my cognitive and my intellectual inferiors. We're supposed to be educating these little medieval gargoyles. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I can't really put my finger on exactly the day, but it was somewhere around 1972, after the Kent State business and after the kerfuffle about the Vietnam War. I started to notice that my colleagues in the philosophy department and also in the humanities, this is back in Massachusetts, they were no longer using the words good or bad to speak in moral terms. They were using the words acceptable and unacceptable.
Right.
And I started to then drill down into why they were doing it. I would ask them why. And of course, what they did was they presented me with postmodern thinkers. Because postmodern, you mentioned this at the beginning of our broadcast today, postmodernism is nothing other than the denial of any objective good or objective evil, the denial of any objective knowledge, the denial of any objective truth, the denial of any objective beauty. The four things that constitute philosophical inquiry: reality, truth, goodness, and beauty. But I noticed that today, if your department chair or your provost or your president disagrees with you, or a colleague disagrees with you, they don't say that your ideas are good or bad. They say that your ideas are unacceptable.
Yes.
So in other words, we arrive at truth by some sort of consensus. Whoever has the votes on the board of trustees or the school board, they must be right because they've got the votes.
Right.
So it's become a political process.
Yes. As opposed to appealing to some sort of objective criteria, a number of objective criteria that we can agree to adjudicate among competing truth claims.
Yeah.
Right? And let the best argument win out in the marketplace of ideas. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. Mm-hmm. And some of us are just going to have to accept the terms of the debate, and the winners will win and the losers will, as in any contest, have to accept the results. Yeah.
Well, let me give you a perspective. You're not the only one fighting against this. Let me tell you something. Let me give you a little perspective of what's happening here in Santa Barbara, actually in Santa Ynez, which is over the hill. In Santa Ynez actually high school, there was a conservative student club, and they posed for their picture for the yearbook, which everybody does. And some of the students were wearing mega hats, Make America Great hats. And some of them were making this sign, okay? This, I don't know if you can see it, this sign, like the okay, all right? Or someone were doing it. And one woman drove up while the picture was being taken. One parent drove up, and of course she was horrified to see young people wearing a mega sign, horrified. And she was offended. And she was also horrified because they were making the okay sign. She looked up the okay sign on the hand signal on Urban Myth online, and she found that it was used by some white supremacists. So she rushes over to the principal, and then rushes over to the superintendent, and rushes over to the school board, and demands that that picture be censored, and that picture has to be reshot. Not only that, but faculty members at the school who were now alerted to the alleged white supremacist photograph. And they had previously sent letters of recommendation on behalf of some of the students in the picture. They announced that they would withdraw, they would write to the colleges again, rescinding their letter of recommendation, endangering the students' education, endangering their employability. In other words, damage these students for simply wearing a MAGA hat and simply making an OK sign. But there's a pushback. I've been speaking to a couple of the parents, and they're going to lawyer up. They're going to be talking to the media. I've found that there are two ways that we can push back: use the law courts and use the media. Those are our two strongest weapons, because we are outvoted. Certainly here in California, we're outvoted.
Yes.
But I don't see any other way to do it. I want to get your idea about the defunding, however. Local school boards are now populated by liberal, progressive, postmodernist, cultural Marxists. There's no question about that. Almost the entire country. I defy anybody to find a place where they're not in control. So it's going to be at least a 10-year election cycle where citizens, parents can run for school boards, can run for boards of trustees. That's not going to happen overnight. But what can happen overnight is to take away federal tax dollars and state tax dollars. How do you see that rolling out?
Well, in one respect, it has to happen incrementally. So it has to be piecemeal. So, for example, schools that don't respect freedom of speech can have their federal funds, and private schools receive their fair share of federal funding too.
Right.
So this will affect even private schools.
Right.
So schools, for example, that don't respect free speech, that shut down free speech, will suffer the consequences of having their federal funds rescinded. Schools that don't give, let's say, conservative voices in the classroom a fair hearing, for example, conservative professors in history, or let's say political science, who don't get a fair hearing at tenure, and who are denied tenure on that basis, will have their funding revoked. So I think it will have to be very incremental, and it will have to be on a procedural basis. And professors and institutions will have to be held very, very accountable. And when money, people will fear you. People will respect you when they can fear you. And when you take away their money, they will learn to fear you.
I had a Latin teacher in high school, Sister Mary Corrida, and we translated Caesar's Gallic Wars. And I was always fascinated by the passage where Julius Caesar defeated much larger forces than his, many times, sometimes 10-1, and he could easily defeat them. And he defeated them, Sister Corrida pointed out, he defeated them by attacking their baggage train, attack their supplies, wipe out their supplies, wipe out their food, deprive them of the means of sustenance, and that's how you win. And what you're suggesting is something that has already been heralded by the President of the United States in his executive order. If you don't respect free speech, we're not going to give you any research money. This is billions of dollars. Billions and billions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars that go directly, as you pointed out, both public and private schools.
Yes, this is essential to our republic. We have to have freedom of speech.
Yeah, but I'm also in favor of. So I know you are in favor of education. We're not trying to advocate, the elimination of education. When I talk to people about this, they say, "Well, why are you against public education?" I'm not. Thomas Jefferson designed the University of Virginia, and when he designed the University of Virginia, you know how he designed it? It's all written down in his charter, and he says, "What I want for the university, this is what education at the university should be. We get the best professors in every field from America and from Europe and from anywhere in the world. We bring them, and citizens go to the university and they study what they want to study, They stay for as long as they want to study it, and they leave when they think that they have done so. There's no degrees. There are no academic degrees conferred. There's no matriculation. There's no pomp and circumstance with the mortarboard hat and the robes and all this nonsense that we drive on. What a revolutionary idea. Thomas
Yes.
Jefferson, the
Yes.
the prime mover behind public education in America. He was the one who started public education in America. So
Yes.
it's not that I don't hear from you or anybody else saying that we should defund education, but defunding education that does not do its job that's an entirely different
Right.
thing. So
Defund indoctrination centers.
well, that's I think that's becoming more and more evident to people right now. Here in Santa Barbara, of course, we're surrounded by liberal, progressive, cultural Marxists, which is fine. I mean, I don't really mind because that's who lives here. Those are the people. That's the community. So we expect that. What I do mind is when they tell other people who oppose them to sit down and shut up, and that they're immoral for even having an idea in opposition to them. That's what's happening to you.
Right.
That's what's happening to you. How are your students reacting to what's going on? I meant to ask you this. You've only been back a day, actually. This is all going on contemporaneously.
Right.
Yeah.
So far they've been fine. My immediate students have been fine. I'm not sure what their reaction will be tomorrow or the day after. It's hard to predict the behavior of students because some of them capitulate to peer pressure. But I had a wonderful class yesterday with them.
Was this in the political theory or was this in ethics or both?
This is an ethics class called Meaning in Life and Why It Matters. It's a seniors class for graduating seniors. And yesterday the class was fine. I'm hoping that the protests won't affect their ethos or their decision. But yesterday we had a wonderful class. It's the only class I'm teaching this semester. I teach 5 classes a year, and this is my 5th class for the year.
Excellent.
And I've gotten lots of supporting letters from students, from dozens of students who've written to me who've said,
right,
"You've been a wonderful professor," and they've written letters to the president himself in support of me. Students have had in the past.
Are you getting any letters like I got before I was forced into retirement with a 6-figure settlement? I would get letters from faculty and students. Professor McIntire, I support you 100%, but I can't say so publicly. I'm afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid I won't be invited to the mayor's cocktail party, or I might be thrown out of the country club, or my daughter might get mad at me. Do you get those kinds of letters?
I get letters from professors who've been at the university for a long time who say, "If you need my support, I'm here for you."
Really?
Yes.
Really? Oh,
I've gotten quite a number of letters from students. Are a little bit more reticent. So students have said, "I don't want to alienate myself from the student body.
Right.
So please keep my letter anonymous." But they themselves have also written to the president. And I can't help but think that must have played some role in influencing the president's decision not to have the university censor me, because there have been a significant number of students who've written in my support.
I read the petition that the students submitted with great interest. I was most struck by one thing, and that is that here are self-confessed atheists, self-confessed Marxists, invoking Saint Vincent de Paul, who is a Catholic saint, invoking St. Vincent as though you are in somehow violation. I think it's hysterical that atheists are quoting St. Vincent to accuse you of being an immoral person.
Well, it goes to show you the level of hypocrisy that people decide to.
It's too
when
rich.
They act from political expediency,
I want to ask you a question about your class that you taught yesterday, the senior thesis class. Do they have to write a thesis to complete the class?
They have to write 10 to 12 page papers for the class.
And in these papers, do they have to state a thesis and then argue their logic and their evidence for the thesis?
Absolutely.
And do they look at the opposing points of view? Do they also include in the thesis, in their papers, do they say, well, okay, here's what I think, but there are other points of view on this? Do they even, are they schooled to do that?
I do teach them that way.
Yeah, I know you teach them that way.
Yes,
know you teach
I
in
do
that.
run my classes that way. I'm
Yeah.
very orthodox in how I'm very old-fashioned and orthodox in how I run my classrooms that way. Both there are alternate points of views that you have to consider, and it's an old school Oxford tutorial style of teaching. That is, you reconstruct the position of this philosopher, you reconstruct the position of the other side, and you present both sides, and you use logic and use reason and rational argumentation and rejoinders to contest the viewpoints. And I want to hear what they have to think, and I want to hear their viewpoints. But it's not just the classroom is not just a dumping ground for their feelings.
Well, obviously you implement the principles of critical thinking and writing in your class. I must say that in my own experience at a very liberal, progressive, Marxist institution, when anyone would speak about critical thinking, they would always define critical thinking as opposing the existing established point of view. That's critical thinking. There was no hint of let's look at both sides, let's look at opposing views. Oh, no. White people are wrong, they're the source of all. Anything with a penis is evil and threatening for rape. Anybody who's wearing a mega hat is an immoral person and probably going to be a serial killer or a bomber or a terrorist. It's just amazing that these people are actually able to function. I mean, they're so filled with nonsense, and they're so filled with hatred. What's your next project? What are you going to be working on next, Jason?
Well, I'm working on a book on higher education.
Thank God.
What's going on in higher education?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that it's going to be a sort of continuation of the article about defund and disband, but it's going to really up the ante a little bit and sort of talk about why the age of the university is dying and is slowly coming to. It's not dying in one apocalyptic blow. It's being bled to death by thousands of tiny scratches, which people are not noticing. The role of free speech is one way in which the university is dying. When free speech is shut down, the role of critical thinking, the assault against reason, the assault against the Western canon, for example, which is a critical part of our Western heritage. The assault against the idea that the university is to cultivate a self-governing, autonomous individual. The idea that the university also is a socializing domain. It's a last bastion in which our young people can have their sensibilities be socialized as moral citizens that prepare them for civic entree into a society. Is all dead. This is nothing original. I'm just resurrecting old ideas. But we're trying to show why the maintenance of our great republic is truly dependent on these ideas.
Well, Alex Madagian, who is now in Washington, D.C. as a correspondent, a student at the college I used to teach at, he reminds me of the fact that my former department chair, during a debate upon the existence of God in the class, would say, "We don't need any more old ideas. We only want new ideas. New, it's going to be new. New is better than old." There's this craziness going on, just insanity about, we have to have new ideas. Somehow new ideas are just better than old ideas.
Well, this is the thing. Ideas come dime a dozen, but what people don't realize is that ideas have to fit with reality.
No.
This is a problem with German idealism and speculative philosophies, that people just sort of like spew ideas, but the ideas don't really fit with reality, do they?
No. So, how are you going to, in your book, are you going to deal, we've only got about 3 more minutes left here. I want to catch up on a few things. In your next work, are you going to deal or get to the disparity in terms of numbers where liberal, progressive, Marxist professors outnumber traditional Aristotelian, Platonic, Kantian, even if you will, professors? almost 50. The ratio now stands at 15-1 nationally. So there are, for every conservative, traditional person like you, there are 15 professors that are not like you at all. They don't believe in objective anything at all.
Yes.
Are you going to
yes.
touch upon that in the book?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think there are a couple of factors that militate against this, and one is that they just don't have institutional support. So people who might be inclined to go into the profession face a daunting task because they don't have the kind of support. They know that they face an uphill battle if they are moral foundationalists, such as myself, if they believe in objective reality, if they believe in the exclusivity and the unassailability of reason as an unassailable value, incontestable value, that they face an uphill battle. So they, rather than just sort of face that battle, they go into some other sort of profession.
Do you think that the evaporation of tenured positions, as we know, tenured positions are declining? Do you think that's a contributory factor to the fact that we have so many liberal, progressive professors rather than there's no balance, there's nothing near equity, nothing near equality in terms of representation? Is the tenure thing involved in that?
I think so, and I'm a little bit torn because sometimes I think I don't want to see the tenure system necessarily abolished.
No, I don't. No, I don't.
I don't.
No.
I think tenure is there for a purpose, but I do want to see more more ideological or political diversity in the humanities being represented. More professors with more conservative viewpoints. Having a fair hearing in the humanities and not have the humanities be hijacked by these ideologues.
Well, one of the things that's happening, you probably noticed this too, is that the schools are getting into the act now. They're realizing that they're not preparing their students for any jobs, and so what they're doing is the universities themselves are defunding the humanities. They're defunding the social sciences. They're even eating away at the theater groups and the arts department, and they're concentrating on computer science and career initiatives. So that's one way in which the system is trying to change itself, because they realize there are no jobs for 13th century lesbian literature professors. I mean, they don't exist. Who's going to hire you for that? Maybe Google will, but nobody else is going to hire you for that.
Right.
So I wish you well on I wish you well on all of the projects that you're involved in, and thank you very much for doing our program, Freedom Matters. You certainly are a hero to me and a hero to those out there who are listening. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.